I got saved when I was 18, and that same year, one of my other friends I used to battle rap against at parties and stuff.
All right.
He became a Christian. You know.
I know you were wondering this. I've never battle rapped before.
You never battle rap, man.
Yeah,
Come on, man.
How you drink your coffee?
You know, I like a little cream, a little sugar, man. So you know, I'm
It's looking out for you a little bit.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks for.
I don't have sugar. Are you gonna be cool with cream
I'll be cool
only?
with cream only,
Okay.
man. Yeah,
All right.
I can make it. I
All
can
right.
make it happen.
All right. Well, so there's a rumor. I heard a rumor going around that you used to rap. Is that true?
This is true. This is true. I used to rap. You know, I like to call myself a retired rapper now.
Are you rolling in the dough from your
Yeah,
previous
no,
albums?
it wasn't like that. No, not at all. It wasn't like that. Shortly after I gave my life to Christ, a crazy opportunity came up. I had been rapping since I was little, you know, since I was probably like in 6th grade. You know, here's what's crazy. I mean, in my lifetime, hip hop began. Like, to say that a music genre started in your lifetime is very interesting. I mean, in both of our lifetimes. But my brother was a DJ, so for him, he's about 10 years older than me. So for him, it was like a big deal. It was his generation. So I started hearing hip hop through DJing first, you know. And I love DJing, and I love the music, and the music also brought out other genres because it sampled a lot of stuff. So I got introduced to a lot of other genres because of hip hop as well. And so I actually love the production side of it. But then one of my homeboys, my man, his name was Sherman, he was rapping, and I was trying to make some little beats, and then he was like, yeah, man, why don't you rap with me, man? And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try it. So I started doing it then, and you know, really enjoyed it. And when I was 18, I got saved when I was 18, and that same year, one of my other friends I used to battle rap against at parties and stuff.
All right.
He became a Christian, you know.
I know you were wondering this. I've never battle rapped before.
You never battle rap, man.
Yeah,
Come on, man.
I never battle rap. Maybe someday.
Maybe
someday.
You know. So, you know, we used to do that, and he ended up, long story short, like, you know, he gave his life to Christ and started to rap, you know, just about what it meant for him to be a Christian. And, you know, we both were believers. And this is crazy, man. He auditioned, we auditioned, me, him, and another young lady auditioned on BET for, so this is back when BET. BET, man. It was back in the day when it used to be in DC. On a show called Teen Summit.
Okay.
And they had a talent showcase for the whole country, and even out of the country. It was some people from South America there, but we auditioned for it, and we ended up making the cut. So I had like 4 minutes of fame on BET back in the 90s. So.
All right, now you grew up small town, North Carolina.
Yes.
Wife as well grew up small town, North Carolina, not far from Wilmington. She did, right?
Yeah, she's originally from Florida, but she spent most of her time here in Wilmington. Yes.
Went to Laney.
Went to Laney, man.
Went to Laney, where Jordan went.
Where Michael Jordan went to high school, man.
You grew up, what is it, Oxford, Creedmoor?
I grew up in Butner, which is in that area.
Right.
It's a little small town. Used to be a military World War II camp. So
yeah.
That's where the federal prison is right now. So all the famous Club Fed guys are there, you know.
Yeah.
John Gotti and those cats they went there.
All right, so small town North Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Growing up, African American guy in rural North Carolina. Certain realities that you've faced throughout your whole life, I assume.
Yes.
I remember the day that everything changed for me when it came to the conversation of racial reconciliation. I didn't understand at all. This was back in 2012, Trayvon Martin situation. I didn't understand at all what was happening in culture in our country and why African Americans were so upset. And for the first time I sat down with a brother who was a friend and I had him explain the situation to me, and that was you. Do you remember that conversation?
Man, I do remember it, man. I remember sharing my experience with a lot of brothers who probably normally wouldn't even know anything about it if we didn't decide to talk about it.
So that started my journey, and so we're talking 7 years now removed of trying to figure this out and trying to figure out what this looks like for me and for us and for the church at large. But what do you say to the person that feels like talking about race in the church or just race in general, the person that thinks we're making matters worse by discussing race and ethnicity so much?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely ludicrous. I mean, if we were to, every time we read about ethnicity in the scripture, like even if it was, every time we see the word Gentile, every time we see the word nation or ethnos, if we were to take that out in the Bible, like, I mean, the Great Commission that what we call it, the Great Commission, when Jesus says, "Go ye therefore into," we don't talk about it.
All nations.
All nations.
Baptize them in the name of the Father, Son.
What are we gonna do with that? Like, we don't get to pick and choose, like,
And the word nations there is the word ethnos in the Greek, which we get our word ethnicity from.
Where we get ethnicity from.
Yeah.
And it's just it's laced all throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So it's like, if Jesus didn't emphasize it, he knew that this was gonna be something that I think would mark us as a people.
So you would say not only culturally do we need to talk about it, but you said biblically, even if there weren't necessarily all these issues, even if we were in a different country, we still need to have conversations about ethnicity because it's a biblical reality. Is that what you're saying?
It's a biblical reality. We're people of the Bible. So, I mean, if you're going to be a Christian, you definitely, I don't understand how you cannot, so it's just, I think that's the reality of where I see it,
So how does somebody like me grow up in white America, white evangelicalism, for 25 years and never hear a sermon on ethnicity?
It's interesting, and I think that kind of relates back to what we were just talking about, because where you have the reality of someone trying to take a verse out, which we would never do that. I heard Thomas Jefferson did that. He took all the parts of the Bible out that he didn't want and created a version that, and while we would never like physically do that, sometimes we do that because we've preached about stuff and we talked about stuff, but when it came to this section or this topic or this wrestling with this thing that's tough, do we choose, to honor kind of what is being said or not? So I think it's very easy. I mean, it's very easy. There are a lot of things. That's the joy of being in a church that preaches the whole Bible, because at some point we're gonna get to, we're gonna get to an issue or a topic, that's gonna be like, man, what is that?
I'm making a mess. I've done this before.
Pouring coffee, man.
I've done this before. This is gonna be the best coffee.
It looks like it's gonna be awesome.
You ever tasted?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think I just think the reality is that everybody, regardless of your denominational background, ethnic makeup, economic stratus, whatever, we just have blind spots when it comes to the scriptures that I just don't see things.
Yes.
And you see things and other people see things, and I need you to help me see what you see,
Yes, it's like there are several things that we should do in community. One of them is definitely we should read our Bible in community. The joy of reading the Bible in community together is that I get to see everybody's, how it applies to everyone that's around me. But if we're homogenous in even that, like even when we pray or read the Bible or whatever we're doing as we worship God, we're limiting ourselves. So that's the reason why it's so limiting, I think, even when we expound on the scripture.
All right, give that a little try. See what you.
See what you
think right there.
Let me see what you got, man. See what you got here.
So if you had to pick only one, Jay's, Tim's, or Chuck's, Jay's, Tim's, or Chuck's, what you picking?
I don't even know why you're asking that question, man. Clearly, Jay's.
Jay's all the way.
All the way.
All right.
Mike. People will stop you and have a conversation. You might even lead somebody to Christ just because you wearing some J's.
So your J's are a witness.
I mean,
is what
it's a
you're
witness
saying.
for Jesus.
That's
man,
right.
You know.
That's right. So Eric Mason, in his book Woke Church, he talks about race battle fatigue. And there's a lot that's happened over the last couple of years of guys who have had so much fatigue that they're kind of done with it, you know,
Right.
and really just want to walk away from the conversation of trying to figure out multi-ethnic church and making this happen. You ever experienced race battle fatigue? What is that, and what's it been like for you?
Definitely. I've definitely dealt with it. And I think, first, I think I've always made it a point to help people understand the difference. People use that term loosely sometimes. There's a difference between being frustrated and being fatigued. I think, if you look at it like exercising, like you can not want to do something, or you can do it for a little while and it's very frustrating trying to figure it out, versus someone that actually is doing it. Like if you have to do 50 push-ups, you do 50 push-ups, and when you get to 51 and you can't do anymore, they call that muscle fatigue.
Right.
You
right.
know? So I think people that's actually been in it doing it are the ones that can say, I'm fatigued. And people that get a little frustrated because they're uncomfortable or things aren't working right, that's frustration. That's not fatigue. So I've had fatigue for just, really plowing down, just trying to, love, and people just not here, and endurance, and and then you get fatigued. And the dangerous thing about fatigue is that if you try to do ministry out of fatigue, it can be dangerous for you and everybody else.
Right.
Right. But there's an answer to it, right?
Yeah,
I think it's wise to figure out ways to get renewed and figure out ways to get recharged. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't do it, and especially people in these settings. So I've made it a point to try, to get renewed. I know how to do it. So when I get fatigued, that means I got to take some time off. I got to know, here's some things that I do in order to get some energy back so I can jump back into the fight again.
So our church, the Bridge Church, has always been a gospel-centered church, but we've tried to make significant progress in the area of racial reconciliation even over the past 2 or 3 years. To some, it seems like we're putting too much emphasis on race rather than the gospel. What do you say to? Because surely that danger is potentially there.
Right.
What do you say to the person that kind of feels that?
Whenever I hear that, the first thing I always ask is, what other areas would you say that about? Just to see where that person is. I'm like, would you ever say we're putting too much emphasis on evangelism?
Right.
We're putting too much emphasis on discipleship. We're putting too much emphasis on holiness. We're putting too much, because while you can, do that, I think that like the fact that Jesus walked into a temple and turned over tables, not over what they were doing, but about where they were, a place where Gentiles were supposed to be able to come and see and worship.
Right.
Made a whip, chased those guys out. I'm like, could you say that to Jesus then? Jesus, I think that's not the gospel. I think that's I'm like, I don't know if you would say that. It's one of the few places, that we see, him use righteous anger, and it's over the nations, because he said, you made this a house of den and robbers, but it should be a house of prayer for all
nations. The ethnos.
He's quoting Isaiah.
Right.
He's reminding them that this has been God's plan all along. And so when I hear people say, it's too much, I wonder where their heart is, in understanding it, and I want them to see that, like, there is a proper way to be passionate about this. Right. And then of course there is also ways that you can be so passionate that you miss the gospel, and I get that too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so as we try to pursue racial reconciliation, becoming a multi-ethnic church, which I really believe is a kingdom initiative and a biblical mandate if you're in an area that represents various ethnicities and different cultures. As we pursue this mission, it seems like sometimes it feels like nobody's happy, right? Yes. Nobody on this side is happy. Nobody on this side is happy. You're trying to figure out how to make these folk happy and these folk happy, and it seems like no one is happy sometimes. Yeah. And sometimes you kind of get that feeling like, is it worth it?
Right.
And So I would ask you, is it worth it?
Yeah, it is most definitely worth it. I'm a better man. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better preacher, pastor, because of all the relationships that I have now. Because of the Korean brother that has poured into my life, for my white brothers that have done that, for my Cuban brother that has poured into my life. We're better, as people, when we work hard at just doing what the gospel tells us to do, for us to be unified. So it's worth it. I think the danger is a lot of times we don't set up measurables at all. Like we don't.
Yeah.
And the danger in that is that when you don't have,
feels like you're not making any
you're
progress.
making any progress if
Yeah.
you don't know what progress looks like.
Right.
And sometimes progress, some of the best relationships that I have are relationships that have survived, turmoil. It's not relationships where we never had any.
Yeah, right.
It's ones where it looked like it was going off the rocker, but because of Jesus, we're still together.
Right,
Those are the
right,
strong. Those are the strong
right.
marriages. Those are the strong
Right.
friendships. Those are the strong. So even in this realm, I think, it's if you fight for, only when you fight for it, will you find out that it was worth it. If you
Right.
don't fight for it, you'll never know.
Right. Right. How long is this going to take?
Forever. It's gonna take forever. I mean, even when we get to heaven, it's an eternity of us getting to know Jesus and Him making us more like Him. So I mean, sanctification. How long does sanctification take? It's
Right,
takes
right,
forever. So
right,
definitely
right,
this
right.
right here is going to be the same thing. So
Yeah.
so I think we can be encouraged because God is so gracious to us.
Right. Yeah. Was ever a moment like for you that was like a defining moment where you were like either on campus as a kid, police brutality, like something? Do you have one of those stories that's kind of like where you were like, whoa?
Like what do you mean when you say like?
You
Like
where you experienced like significant racial
Oh yeah, I mean, for me the most traumatic moment I've ever experienced with race, it was when I was like maybe 10 years old, and we had some guys tailgating us at night on the way home, and when they pulled up to our when we pulled up into the driveway, and back then they pulled up to the front of our yard, and they yelled at us. They said, "Niggers, we're gonna burn your house down." And it was just me, my mom, and my dad. And I remember being shocked, and I remember my dad going straight into, "Oh, I'm going to protect my family."
Right.
and
Wow.
And he went in there, and he grabbed a gun and was there to protect his family after his family got threatened. And I just remember being just standing there just shocked.
Wow.
My dad, the police came, those guys drove away and, never found out who they were. But I just remember my dad sitting out on the porch all night long. And I realized, I was like, man, this is like, what is going on?
Right.
I always stand amazed at like my father and that generation, because and my dad's a believer now. He wasn't then, but it's still amazing to me the way that things like that could happen, and he could still go to work and go to places where he had to work around people and know how to separate that foolishness from from other people. I mean, I can't imagine. So yeah, that was definitely, there was several moments, but that was the one that it was rough.
Hey, appreciate you, man.
No doubt.
All right, brother.
Always.
Love you, man.
Always love you too, man.